Hey guys, I decided to do another video. I got some nice books in the mail and I've been really interested in these books ever since I've discovered them, and I finally decided to treat myself, and I thought I would just walk you through the books real quick. So I will always love to collect all the books that come out of Scandinavia or Scotland or anything related to colorwork. I'm a huge fan, and I love being able to support the designers that started out as indie designers and working through social media and then getting a book publication. It's such an amazing achievement, and I'm so overwhelmed by the huge amount of work that went into these books. This is Maja's Swedish Mittens, and the other is called Socks from Around Norway. So I would just provide a brief introduction first. I thought the photography in Maja's Swedish Mittens was unbelievably beautiful. It very much felt like a lifestyle book with some beautiful handcrafted works of art with wool and needles. A very beautiful, loving spirit who was behind this. It just impressed me with her heart and her love for all things in nature and handcrafted everything. You can see that she very much lives a life of beauty in the simple things, and it was just a phenomenal experience. And I haven't even read the stories in here. I've just looked at the photography and the patterns and the brief intros to each pattern. The one thing that you might want to think about if you're considering buying this book is that some of the colorwork charts are fully charted out for the complete mitten, and in other cases you just get the pattern repeat. So you'll need to be prepared to know how to use the pattern repeat as you decrease down to the tip of the mitten. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind about this book is that it was very artistically done. So with the charted designs, they are all done with colored pencil, and they look like they've been taken out of a page from her design book, notebook. So the charted designs are not on even grids, and the colors for each square in the grid are dotted in with colored pencil. So there's some areas where it's not exactly clear, and for some people they may feel the need to rechart these designs on some knitting charting software. So just something to think about. Then the socks from Around Norway, what really stood out for me with this book was the really pleasurable walking tour through the history of hand knitting in Norway and Europe, and in some cases outside of Europe. Mostly it's a European knitting history book with some amazing technical, detailed information on sock construction that I'm so grateful to have, because I'm not a sock knitter, and I only have a few books on sock knitting, and it really focuses a lot on colorwork knitting and cabling. And there's a couple of pair of socks in here with cabling patterns that were just to die for amazing, and a couple with colorwork designs that were fantastic. And every sock in here tells a really special story. So on to opening up the books. We'll start with Maja's Swedish Mittens first. And I wish that the publisher, this publisher, Trafalgar Square, tends to do all of the English language books that come out on colorwork knitting, and I'm so grateful to them. I think they could have done a better job with the cover because it really doesn't show you the incredible beauty of the photography on the inside of the book. But whenever I see a book on Amazon, usually the best books don't have the best covers, and the books that are not so good have really good covers. So I took it as a sign it's a really good book. I think they could have done better on the cover. Other than that, I have nothing to say about the book from the publisher perspective. That I think Maja, I don't follow her on Instagram. I'm aware of her, but my sense is that they probably hired an amazing photographer, because I very much felt like I spent the winter with her inside this book. And right now, it was a lovely, lovely experience to get to have. And I got a little complaint on a comment in my last video that people were upset that I had showed some of the patterns that people were selling individually, and that I might be detracting from their ability to earn income from them because they thought that maybe people could just steal the pattern off my video. And if a designer shows up and says that they felt that way, I would just delete my video. But from my perspective, I don't think I'm giving anything away, because I don't think somebody could just rip off a pattern by looking at a page view in a book. A lot of these page views are available on Amazon already, so I just thought I would just really help promote this book because I found it so enjoyable, and I think other people will find this to be an amazing treat for themselves for Christmas or for a knitter that you really like. So this is just one example of the incredible photography, and I've never been to any of the Scandinavian countries, and I'm overwhelmed by the beauty of how you can live in the country in Scandinavia and just be so filled with a rich, beautiful life of unbelievable historical treasures and natural beauty, and a life of living by making things for yourself. Everything in here was very much inspired by hand craftsmanship. I think the sun here is shifting a little bit, so let me see if I can open my window. We're starting to lose the sunlight earlier in the day, and I think a camera's creating some shade here. But this is just a really small example of how beautiful the photography is in this book, and everything about the photography communicates so much about the design. You don't really need to read a lot in this book because the photos tell you everything about the thought and care that was put into the designing of the mittens and all of the inspiration from Maja's natural surroundings that went into her design work. And it is truly, truly an inspiration and a delight and something just I feel like a treasure to hold in my hands. This book just put me into the stratosphere with joy and happiness. I saw this log cabin and I instantly remembered from my quilting days that if you're a quilter, you'll know that the log cabin in America was actually a gift from the Swedish people who came to the prairie and taught other people how to make them. And the #1 quilt that was made in America during the prairie days were log cabin inspired quilts. And when I look at this log cabin, I've never seen one in real life, and I just feel like it's just right there. And the beautiful aging of the wood and the icicles that are dripping down the ledge and just seeing the frosty snow everywhere just kind of felt like this winter wonderland that I just wanted to dive right into. And the photographers really just capture that here in this book. And side by side, you see the gorgeous, gorgeous mittens. And I just can't get over how beautiful this book was developed. It's just the raw beauty and power of nature here is just spectacular, and the warmth of the interior where they shot these photos. I think it looks like a living history museum type home that was preserved, and they have a lot of beautiful photos in here on the inside and the outside. So I don't want to give too much away whenever there's a charted design, so I'll just quickly go over that. I think there are mittens in here for beginners who have never done a mitten, and mittens in here that could be done for people who have done mittens but want to learn more how to do mittens with color work. And I think there's a lot of rich detail in here for people who are really inspired to understand the design process and to get inside the head of a designer who's spent a lot of thought and care in creating something unique that's based on tradition, but that is inspired by the everyday beauty in her life. And this, I just fell in love with these acorns, just so precious. And seeing how the design process unfolds in her thinking is really, really fun and special. And all of the photo props that are in this book were truly fun and inspirational. I can see that she's probably visited a lot of antique stores, some beautiful fingerless mittens here. There's lots of found objects in this book where there are things from nature and things from antique stores, found objects that are artifacts from history, old pairs of scissors, old yellowing notebook pages. There's some really super cool fun details on a lot of these patterns that I also loved. There's some cabling type ribbing here in these mittens that I'm dying to try. I've seen that on one hat pattern on Ravelry, and that's it. And I was thinking, I'll just buy the hat pattern and learn how to do that. And I was really so grateful to see that style of ribbing in these mittens, because I really get tired of the 2x2 ribbing and the 1x1 ribbing, and this is such an attractive way to do ribbing. So I don't want to give too much away, but there's a variety of fingerless mittens, and oh, this was my favorite. I gotta cover that up. So this was my favorite pair of mittens. This is her Christmas mittens. It's Christmas now. It has this beautiful trellis design. The background is white. The trellis pattern is in green, and it looks like there's a little red berry at the intersection of these diagonal lines with this really sweet checkerboard cuff, which reminded me of Martha Stewart refrigerator cookies. If you guys are familiar, it's that I've always buy her cookie magazine at Christmas, and just thinking how much pleasure there is in being able to knit alongside a photo that has them in the right setting, and seeing the inspiration behind the theme. It's just so precious. I wish my house looked that pretty. Here's a better shot of those mittens, but I just think it's so much more pleasure when you see the mittens in the photo, and it just feels like it's a fun knitting experience when you've got that visual reference and inspiration. Some designs are so simple, but so beautiful and elegant in their simplicity that I could see for me that it would be a pleasure to knit. I'm always thinking I want the most difficult project, and sometimes it's nice to see some simplicity, some elegant simplicity, and I think there's a lot of patterns in here. Some are playful. I loved these travel mittens, so clever, and we're getting into almost the halfway mark in this book. I definitely think you could keep yourself busy knitting mittens for years and years with this book. If you, the more you look and the more you explore what's inside, the more you become inspired, I think. I loved the story behind these mittens. She talks about the meaning behind this motif and how it's found in folk art and their cultural traditions in Sweden. And this motif reminds me of Pennsylvania Dutch folk art that you can find in folk art museums in America. And it's so exciting to see that, because I have relatives who descended from Switzerland and Austria that lived for a time in Pennsylvania. So this really gets me excited from my own personal ancestors, and kind of knowing that they were a part of these traditions too. So there's all kinds of different shapes of mittens as well. Some have rounded tips, some have more angular tips. There's fingerless mittens. Look, I think this is one of the cutest patterns of the whole book, how clever. It reminded me of a Tiffany ring. There was a trend that was going on for a while, maybe about 10 years ago, where everybody was getting a ring to put on their thumb. And I have this little Tiffany ring that I used to wear on my thumb at work. And I just felt like she just captured that so beautifully. That's what I think of when I see these mittens. And I love that they're gray and that they just have this little pop of color. I think that's the most clever thing. And so I love these mittens here. The two lovebirds sitting on top of the heart. It looks like the photo styling seems to suggest it's for Easter. And I think these are so sweet. She has a daughter, and I think her and her daughter could see them wearing matching mittens and just walking together in the snow that she talks about in her book. So maybe I should end for now, because the video is getting a little long. And oh, this is a perfect ending point. These squirrel mittens are so precious, and I tried to check on Ravelry to look at all the mittens before I bought the book, and this one didn't even come across my radar. So this was such a cute, fun little treat to see these squirrels. It's just so precious. I can't say enough good things about this book. So the rest I'll leave for you to discover and explore. If you decide to buy this book, I definitely highly, highly, highly recommend this book. And in case you're wondering, this is all from IKEA, a whole $4 I spent on this. And my table and chair set, I think we spent $100 on a table and 4 chairs from our local IKEA. We're trying to do Scandinavian Christmas this year. So this book was photo styled very differently. I didn't think that the photo styling was the same, but I think the point of this book was very, very different. It was all about capturing and recreating socks that were taken from inspiration from the Victorian era, I think, for the most part. And there's so much good, detailed documentation here on sock construction, different heels, different ways of doing the heel flap, the gusset. I'm dying to read all of that in detail. The intellectual curiosity side of my brain is going to get really excited about going through those areas. I love a good book with tons of good, detailed technical documentation, and for that alone, this book was absolutely worth the small amount of money that I paid. I've been following Ina Knits and learning a lot about socks from her, and it makes me really excited to want to become a sock knitter. The sizing on these are not as detailed as Maja's Swedish mittens. You'll get the finished size for the mittens in Maja's book, but you don't get these in this book. So what you get is two sizes: a men, it'll say men or women, and it'll give you gauge, but it will not tell you what the finished measurement is. But you can calculate that from looking at the gauge and looking at the number of stitches and then determining how many inches in length and width that you would end up with if you knit them in gauge. And then it's really up to you to make the calculations and adjustments to get these socks to fit your feet. And since all of us have such a unique foot anyways, I'm assuming inevitably everybody's going to want to do that, is to learn how to make modifications. Most of the yarn that was used here was from Rama. Oops. And it looks like the photo styling was done at one location in somebody's home, all on the same day. And it has the more modern look and feel to the way the photographs were, in contrast to all the historical heritage information. So you'll get the photo and then the historical heritage information on the left side and a more modern photo on the right side. So the old and the new, I guess you could say, was the theme and the way they decided to develop this book. And another good thing about this book is that the charting in here was phenomenal. So these, I think most, if not all, of the patterns in this book had everything charted out from beginning to end. And so you would never have to kind of just only look at the pattern refeed and try to figure out how to get it into the sock. That's all been done for you, and it's just a tremendous amount of work. And I think the way the charting has been done is super interesting, because I've never seen charted designs for socks the way they've been charted out in this book. So that was really cool. These men's socks, I probably won't show up on the camera, but these were one of my favorite socks because there's a lot of cabling in there. And it's, I know Lane has, I think it's called 52 Weeks of Socks. It's a book out that I'm kind of thinking of getting, but it doesn't have a lot of color work in there, but it does have a lot of lace and cabling. And this, to me, felt like it could fit right into that book as well. It's just really beautiful textural knitting, and maybe one day I'll have the patience to do that. And I'm so glad that that's in this book, because I just kind of feel like it's like a treasure trove of a wide range of socks you can pick from here. A lot of the colorwork patterns in this book were traditional and simple, and what I think when I say those words is not in a way that's undermining what was done. It was more along the lines of remembering that women worked very hard, long hours all day to care for their family, care for their homes. They were tired, they knit in long hours in the night when the light wasn't that great. And this was to make sure their family was able to stay warm and healthy in the winter. And so I can only imagine that being able to develop designs that were easy to remember without having to stare at, lots of pages of charts and graphs, and just how beautiful and pleasing these simple repetitive repeats are in these really beautiful classic monotone color schemes is something really endearing and comforting about those patterns. So some I like better than others. It's just phenomenal work on the charting there. Oops, some people get mad at that. So hopefully nobody is going to feel that that can be stolen. There's maybe 2 or 3 children's socks in here, and those seemed really amazing. So for example, if you're just becoming a sock knitter, what a great way to teach yourself on a smaller pair. If you make a boo-boo, you're not having to rip out as much. And what a great way to learn how to use double-pointed needles. I've noticed that a lot of people are using 9-inch circular needles. That has gotten really popular on YouTube. My goodness, I've just kind of delved into the sock knitting world over the past couple of days to kind of do a memory refresh on how to turn a heel and the heel flap and the gusset and all that. And I was like, wow, the 9-inch circulars are getting really popular out there. So I felt like a lot of these socks were done in really colorful candy colors in a way, and I think maybe that was a design preference from this author, as opposed to more earth tone, natural colors and traditional colors, so really bright, colorful colors here. This is one of my absolute favorite pair of socks in the book. The cabling in here was so feminine, as opposed to the other pair of socks that I mentioned earlier that were all in white. You can see the cables better in the green here, and I actually really love this color, and I love these socks, and what an expert knitter. I'm pretty sure my cables will really suck and look terrible and ugly, and I'll probably hate them. But seeing the photo on what it's supposed to look like is amazing. So these were really, 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 really pretty. Different socks were inspired by different events in life, weddings, birthdays, celebrations, things along those lines. She's tried really hard to interpret older designs and bring them into a modern pattern. And oh, here's another gorgeous pair of socks that are all based on a textured pattern, just unbelievably beautiful. And maybe I should just get so some of the colors, you know, color is such a highly individual preference that not everyone is going to maybe like some of the color combinations in this book, but I think in that case, it's just a matter of really using your mind and kind of visualizing. If you really love the color work pattern, you can visualize what colors you think you would be really happy with. This was one of my favorite pair of children's socks. And one thing that you could do is, with this book is, since there's so many charted designs in here, you may never knit all the socks, but you can definitely borrow from the charted designs to develop your own designs, which I kind of like the idea of. But if I had a grandbaby coming on the way, I would definitely be picking those socks because they are super cute. And if you were trying to get started on making socks, you can make those and knit them up probably a lot faster than an adult pair of socks. So lots of good fun things about socks for the whole family in here. Here's a really simple pair of socks. And let's see. So I think there's I think 2 socks in here that go all the way up. I think we call these knee socks in English in America here, and in American English I was trying to say. And the originals are so amazing. I wish the publisher had thought to make a larger photo of the vintage sock or to do like a magnifying bubble, to do a kind of a close-up around this section of the book. That would have added a lot, because, I don't know, for historical purposes, not everyone gets to go to these museums and see these beautiful patterns, and it would have been fun to see a close-up of all these beautiful vintage photos. So try to skip over the charted designs so I don't give those away. And There's Entrelac Socks, and I'll just stop here. It's just a really sweet pair of socks that to me look like tennis socks, where they would go just above the ankle. So a really, really, really fun trip through history and seeing modern interpretations of vintage designs, and a phenomenal work of history. The author was talking about how she wanted to make this a contribution to women's history and folk art history and knitting history, and a super, super neat sock book. So the final thing I was just going to say is that, in case you've never gotten a book from Scandinavia, and this is probably going to be really different for American knitters, a lot of these socks and mittens are knit with a heavyweight fingering or a sport weight yarn in Scandinavia. I think these books heavily rely on Rama, which is, I would call, heavyweight fingering, or lightweight sport weight. And they tend to use those, like a heavier gauge yarn with a smaller needle. So what I find is, maybe if you were using Rama, for me, I feel comfortable knitting Rama Finalgarn with a 3.25 millimeter needle. But they're going to be calling for a much smaller needle that's normally meant for a lighter gauge yarn. And my assumption, and anybody out there correct me if I'm wrong, my assumption is that because it is so very cold there, that doing a heavier yarn with a lighter needle will give you a very thick, dense mitten to keep your feet and hands extremely warm. And it's a little bit, for me personally, more challenging to knit with sport weight yarn with a fingering weight needle. And so it's just something to keep in mind. And the other thing to talk about in closing here is that you do have to figure out gauge and see how to either modify the pattern or modify the needle size and the yarn that you use to get the gauge you need to get the socks or the mittens to fit your hands or feet. And that's a whole technical issue that is not really addressed in these books at all. So just be prepared for that if you're going to get these books and work with those projects. But I've just accepted that that is just going to be a part of knitting books that come from Scandinavia, and I'm so grateful to the publisher and the designers for getting these books out in English, because it's a really rare treat. We don't get really good high quality books in English from that part of the world too often, so I try to make sure I get all the extra special ones that come out every year. So maybe every year I'll find 3 or 4, and then I'm always finding 3 or 4 patterns that I want to knit with right away. So over time, if your library gets too full, sometimes what I'll do is I'll just take the mittens, the photo and the pattern out of the book, put it in a plastic sleeve, and then put those in a ring binder. So I just hang on to the ones that I love the most. And then sometimes what you can do is just donate the rest of the book to a library program where they give books away for free or sell them for $1 or 50 cents. So anyways, I hope you really enjoyed my book review. It's Maja's Swedish Mittens, Over 30 Imaginative Patterns to Knit by Maja Carlson, and Socks from Around Norway by Nina, and I don't know how to pronounce Nina's last name. I think it's Gronlund or Grunland. I don't have my glasses on. And then it looks like Sother, and I absolutely don't know how to pronounce that. But I'll put all the information in the information box below, and I hope you take a look at these books and maybe put them in your shopping list for Christmas time as a treat for yourself or for someone that you really think would enjoy these a lot. So thanks so much, you guys, for visiting my channel today, and I'll talk to you next time.